Not only was the farm too small for Helen and Palmer, but they always had to see everything they could possibly see. Even in their younger, struggling days, they drove from Seattle to North Dakota to visit family, but as they thrived, their travels expanded around the country, then around the world.
We used to, when Palmer's folks were alive and my dad was alive, we'd go back nearly every year to see him. So we would order a Cadillac and go and leave the kids with the grandparents, and we would go to Detroit and pick up a new Cadillac. Well, I think it must have been the year 1951-52. We picked up the Cadillac at the factory, and we went down south of Detroit, and we pulled into a hotel, and we were going to back up. There was no reverse at all in this Cadillac. And so we just turned around and drove right back to the factory. They gave us another car. Whenever we went back and got a car in Detroit, we'd always make a trip out of it. We thought it was a good experience for the kids. And on this one trip, we hit the Grand Canyon. It was very spectacular and beautiful, and we thoroughly enjoyed it. And we're out walking along the edge of the canyon, and Palmer pulled out his German Luger and shot it off. It echoed, re-echoed, and re-echoed. And I was afraid the police would come and get us and arrest us. And we were away from thank goodness, from the observation deck, or we would have really gotten into trouble. Palmer always booked our trips, and I never checked on any of them because he always did. I didn't realize we were going first class, 5-star hotels, spending a mint. And this one year, I took Carol and Diane back to stay with the grandparents while I met Palmer in Detroit. And so I took the girls back there, and then I took the train to Minneapolis. And from Minneapolis to Detroit, I was going to fly. And so I went up to get my ticket, and she said, "Coach, you're first class." And I said, "Well, what's the difference?" I said, "Is there a difference in price?" She said, "Yes." And when she told me how much difference there was, I said, "Well, I'll go coach." And when we got to Detroit, I saved enough on that one ticket from Minneapolis to Detroit. I went and bought a dress, hats, gloves, purse, shoes, the whole shebang, and had money left over. I think the first big trip we ever took was to Australia. And Walter, Powell, Pearl, and Palmer and I were going to go to Hawaii first because we were going to visit Andy and Catherine. At that time, not too many people traveled to Australia. I know we paid $5,000 apiece for our tickets. And anyway, they had this great big party at the airport for the 4 of us. And then we're supposed to fly out at 9:30 in the morning. Well, they stayed there and partied all day. Because of the snow in New York, the planes weren't allowed to leave. And so I think it was 9:30 that night, they finally got a plane in, a prop plane, and we're going to fly to Hawaii. And Orlo Silvers and his wife and there were 2 other couples stayed with us that whole time. And see, they were posse members, and to see us off. And so we get on the plane and take off, but we're going on the plane. They took us in the first class section, and I said, "I'm sorry, we're traveling coach on this trip." And they said, "You're traveling coach? And they had this great big party for you? You must be very important people." And but you see, I'd ordered those tickets because Palmer always ordered first class, and I thought $5,000 apiece was enough to pay. Andy and Catherine are supposed to meet us, and of course we were supposed to be there at 2:30 in the afternoon. We never got there, and they couldn't figure out. They said, "Well, the plane turned around and went back." And I'll tell you this, when we were on the plane, I said to Palmer, I said, "You know, we're dumping fuel look at that 4-inch pipe out there. There's fuel being dumped. And the hostess came by and I said, you're flying over my new lawn. What's that fuel doing to my grass that I planted? And she said, it'll all evaporate before it ever gets down there. And I said, how come we're dumping fuel? And she said, well, it shows that one of our engines is on fire and we have to go back to Seattle. It's closer and better for us to go to Seattle than to continue to Hawaii. And Palmer said, I thought the moon was on the wrong side of this plate. Anyway, we go back to the airport. Now it's 2:30 at night, in the middle of the night, we're there. And Palmer gets a fiendish idea to call Orlo Silvers. So he calls Orlo, and Orlo says, where are you? Oh, he said, in the middle of the Pacific. He said, you don't have a telephone. Well, yes, I have a telephone. I'm talking to you from the airplane. Oh, no, you don't. He said, I don't believe you. Well, of course, we were sitting in the airport in Seattle. We didn't at that time have phones on planes. There wasn't such a thing. Anyway, then we buy the morning PI paper, and in there's an article about us flying to Australia and about the big party they'd had for us in the society column. Oh, real big deal it was. We had, Catherine finally got a hold of the United Airlines and said, can you possibly find out what happened to that plane? We're at the airport waiting for Andy's brother and his wife to come in, and nobody will tell us anything, and they're not going to arrive. And so he finally called her back and he said they had a little bit of engine trouble there in Seattle yet, and I don't know when they'll leave Seattle. But don't plan on them being there till 6 o'clock in the morning. And so they went home and then come back. And, you know, from being on my feet all day long and all night long, my feet, I took my shoes off. I couldn't hardly get the shoes back on. My feet had swollen so much. But we met them, and I think Walter and Pearl and Palmer and I got a hotel down in Waikiki. And then we'd go out to Andy's and Catherine's. And so, anyway, we took off from there and then went to Tasmania. And when Doug met us at the plane, I asked where Carol was. And he said, oh, she's in the hospital. And of course, the tears started flowing. And anyway, she was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And so, rather than just sit around the house where they had no heat in these houses, we went with Doug on his job. He was working on the mole on the other side of the island. And we saw all of Tasmania. Went out to the prison where they had all the people that they stole a slice of bread. They were shipped from England over there in that prison. I'd like to go back and see that again because it was very, very interesting. But Doug took us with him every day when he had to go out. He was an engineer of geology. And so he was busy, but we went with him. We saw all of Tasmania and ate Tasmanian food everywhere we went. Anyway, then after Carol was getting better and everything was fine, we had our trip to go back. We flew to Melbourne, just Papa and I. And we had quite a bit of time to kill there. And Dorothy Gordon had been on 2 cruises with Les McClure. And first cruise, she was seated at his table, and he was very impressed with her. And so the second cruise they were on, he found out she was on the ship, but at a different table, and he ordered her over to his table. And so she said, now you've got to call him when you get to Melbourne. He would really like it if you call and tell him I said to tell him hello. And want to know when he's going on another cruise. And so I call his phone number, and he answers and he says, who in the hell are you? And I thought, well, do I hang up or do I pursue this further? Then I thought, well, we don't have a thing to do all evening. I might as well talk to him a little bit and tell him hello from Dorothy at least. And he was so tickled to hear from her. And he said, come on over to my apartment. And Mama said, okay, we'll take a cab and come over there. And as we pulled up in the cab, here is Mr. Golden standing on the porch with a bottle of scotch in his hand, and he pulls the cork out and throws it. He said, "You guys aren't leaving until we drink this whole thing." Well, we had a wonderful time at McClure's apartment with Mr. Golden, and apparently they liked Palmer and I, because Mr. Golden came and gave me a group of ebony elephants that he got in Africa, and he wanted me to have that. So he gave me that. And anyway, after a whole evening there, McClure was opening his restaurant the next morning. And he said, "I'll just skip it and let them take care of it." And Palmer said, "Well, no, you can't do that." And he said, "Okay, you take my Rolls Royce then and you go sightseeing." Palmer said, "No way, I'm not driving a Rolls Royce." And anyway, we finally ended up going with him, and he checked it at the restaurant to make sure. And of course, Jeannie was running it. Jeannie was a superb person, really, really a lovely person. And so he took us out, showed us where he was born and where he lived, and then he took us to the 4 and 20 pie factory, and he started that. And we met the manager there that was running it, because he didn't do any work. And it was very enjoyable. And you had to put on white coats and caps and everything to go into where they made the 4 and 20 pies. And they're world famous. So he said, "Well, if you're not going to drive my car, I'll have to take you. I'll just take time off." And Palmer said, "Well, you know, you really should be there for the restaurant when it opens." "No," he said, "they've got to learn to run it themselves and take care of it." So we went everywhere. He took us all over Melbourne that we could drive to and then come back. And we had a nice hotel right downtown, so it was convenient that way. And anyway, when we left there, because he was very wealthy, he called somebody in Sydney, in Auckland, but there were 5 places that he called and told him that we were going to be in town, and told him the hotel we were going to stay at. Now entertain him. You would not believe how we were entertained. First of all, we went out to their station that they owned, and his son, Sue and Ken McClure, lived out there. And so we went out there and stayed for a whole week with them. We changed our airplane tickets because we were flying first class, I think, so we didn't have to worry. And it was more fun. Those guys, I told you last night, at 2:30 in the morning, they were out on the back end of a pickup flatbed truck hunting emus. I went with them, but I wouldn't shoot him then. But anyway, that community where they had the station, one place had a swimming pool, one place had a tennis court, and then of course where Ken and Sue were, they had horses so people could ride. At each place there was something for them to do, so they didn't have to leave the stations. All beautiful homes, and we were wine and dine like you could not believe. And of course, when we get to Sydney, the barristers, the attorney, they entertained us. And the wife was kind of a snob, and she took Palmer out to the kitchen and was showing him the modern equipment she had. And thank God Palmer went, because he was very diplomatic. I could not have been. They were stoves and appliances like we'd had 20 years ago. But she was so proud of them. They were new, she just had gotten them, but they were that far behind. And then we were entertained by the Scott family, and I can't remember their first names, but the one fellow had a beautiful cruiser. And so we went on a trip out into the Sound and out into the ocean on that and back. And then the other Scott brother took us out because he invested in the Greta, which was a racing in the American Cup. Took us all over on that, and we got a little sale on that. That was quite a deal, real big deal to do something like that. And I'm trying to think what else. We were wined and dined by all these people. And anyway, then when we flew to Auckland, same thing happened there. These people called our hotel and we were invited to their house for dinner. Anyway, he raised horse races and he shipped them all over the world in races. So you know he had a lot of money. And well, we thoroughly enjoyed being with them. And so anyway, we saw all of New Zealand, and then went to Tahiti and Fiji, and then back to Hawaii, and then back home. But now, all of these people came to visit us. Les McClure came at least 7 times. And the fellow in Auckland, New Zealand, his wife died. But after that, he came here to visit us twice. And I often wonder, Diane and Monty were given a silver coin that is a collector's item from New Zealand. And they said, no, don't spend this, you keep this, because this is going to be worth a lot of money. Anyway, all these different people came to visit us and stayed with us. We thoroughly enjoyed it, but I said, I don't know anybody that had been treated as royally as we were. And they just was lucky that everybody was very wealthy. It didn't hurt a bit that they had to entertain us. We had such a fabulous trip through Australia and New Zealand. I don't think anybody could ever top it. And I guess that gave us the incentive to travel all we could, which we did. I think I went around the world about 3 times and enjoyed every minute of it. We spent 2 months in South America, 2 months in Africa, but we've been to South Africa and we've been to Northern Africa a lot. We've taken a cruise down the east coast of Africa. We've been to the Holy Land. We've been to Egypt, to the pyramids and the Sphinx, and I went down, climbed all those steps and went down there. Palmer didn't, but I did. And we went all the way down the Nile. And so we wanted to go to the Aswan Dam because Doug, being a geologist, wanted to know more about it, so I had to take pictures of it. And I've been to China 4 times. I've been to Alaska 4 or 5 times, 5 times I think. I've been to Norway 4 times, and I've been to Leningrad, and I've been to Moscow. I've cruised down the Volga River. I took a Rhine cruise. And we cruised on a ship all around the Greek islands. Another cruise was all through the Mediterranean. And then we also went all the way to the Black Sea. And Kossadasi is one place I would like to go back to. That's south of the Black Sea. Very historical, and we had a real good guide, and I'd like to see that again. But we went to Venice about 4 times on that one trip that we were on. And apparently the captain of that ship took a liking to us, and we were seated. I was seated at the captain's left a couple of nights in a row. And the people we were normally sitting with said, boy, they didn't know they had VIPs with them. But anyway, apparently the captain took a liking to me because the second night, he said, I invited our very best customer to sit next to you. You entertain him. So I just asked him questions, got him talking, and so he'd never done this before, but we all went up to the cocktail lounge, and he went over to Palmer and he says, can I dance with your wife? And so we got up and danced, and the captain said he has never, ever danced before. He must really like your wife, he told Palmer, because he's never come up to the cocktail lounge before. And he's very, very wealthy. But anyway, we had a good time, and it was fun. But when we went to leave that ship, Palmer and I didn't think about saying goodbye to the captain or anything like that, even if we did see him a lot. And he and I are going across the yard, getting up to customs. Here comes the captain, jumping all these barriers to come. He says, "You mean you guys were going to go without saying goodbye to me?" And grabbed us and he said, "You don't know how much I enjoyed having you on that ship. And I hope I'll see you again." And so that trip was just fabulous, just fabulous. At that time, we had Mrs. Walker, Ann Walker, come and babysit the kids. Her husband had died. You know, she wasn't young, but she spoiled Monty rotten. She made him the fanciest pastries and pies and cookies and cakes, and she just waited on him hand and foot. Did everything, let them do anything they wanted to do. And anytime we went on a trip, she'd move in and take care of them. And she called herself Monty's second mother. And she'd come in later when we got the travel agency, she'd come in there and she said, "Helen here, this is Monty's second mother." And everybody thought that was hilarious, but I don't know what I'd have done without her, because we would go away 2 months at a time. And they were having so much fun with her that they didn't want us to come home. I know we took a cruise from Hawaii to Vancouver one time because they said, "You're coming home already?" And I said, "Well, don't you want us?" "No, we're just doing fine." So I said, "Okay, we'll take a cruise. Come home from Vancouver and come home." So that's what we did. But I'm glad, at the time it bothered me that I was leaving them because they were quite young. But I decided that, you know, Palmer wasn't healthy and he wanted to do all this stuff, and so we did it. And we traveled all over the world. There wasn't, I don't think we missed anything. He didn't feel he missed anything. Flying has really changed a lot over the years. Everybody used to go to the airport to see us off because we were flying all over the world and exotic countries, and you were allowed at that time to see people go fly off. Now you can't do that. They will allow you out there. And so it makes quite a bit of difference. And even meeting you at the airport. And they let the people come on the planes. They don't do that anymore. And of course, travel has become very commonplace. Everybody flies now.
With so much traveling themselves, it was only logical that Helen and Palmer would eventually invest in their own travel agency.
I was at this bridge luncheon one day with Jane, and the people asked where was my next trip, because Palmer and I were always traveling. He loved to travel, and we traveled everywhere. And I said, "Well, I guess we'll have to pick a cruise to some spot we haven't been." And Jane said, "Well, why don't you buy your interest in a travel agency? We're looking for somebody to buy in with us." And nothing more was said, but I come home and told Palmer that night what Jane had said, and he said, "Well, why don't you call Johnny and tell him to go and tell us more about it?" So they came over, and this was a travel agency in downtown Edmonds, and the upshot of the conversations, everything was that we would buy in, and then we would loan the two girls that worked there each $10,000 so they could buy in a fourth interest. And Jane and I were only supposed to work 2 days a week. And because I didn't know much about selling travel or the computer, I was supposed to do the books. Well, it didn't take long that all changed. I worked 6 days a week most of the time. I not only issued tickets, but did all the book work. And I'm the only one in the office there that sold the Concorde and a trip around the world, and leased a plane from United Airlines and filled it. We sent the Woodway School band back for the inauguration. I believe it was Nixon's inauguration, and then also to Disney World. And we raised all the money so nobody had to pay anything. We raised all the money. But then Palmer was sick so much and took up so much of my time that we hired a new bookkeeper, and we sold out to Johnny and Jane And we'd also bought out the other two girls because we felt it was much better if just Jade and I owned it. But then I went to outside sales and continued. This was in 1970 when we bought the agency. And I stayed with travel business until about 97, I believe, when I decided that the office closed and I decided that that was time for me to quit. And I thoroughly enjoyed it because I went everywhere in the world. And when I was a director for ASTA, we were treated royally wherever we went. Didn't hardly have to pay for a thing. It was a very good experience for me.
Palmer was creative in many ways, and he used artistic pursuits as his own form of physical therapy while recovering from so many of his bouts of illness.
Well, Palmer was sick so much that he decided that he would just retire, more or less. And he was bored because he was used to being active, and he started by wood carving and carving small things, and he carved totem poles. So we had one totem pole that was 15 feet high. It took 6 men to put it up on a cement platform in our patio. And we had tikis on either side of the carport. We had tikis on either side of the travel agency. And then he went into ceramics, made his own molds, and made all kinds of ceramic things. And then he went into oil painting, and he did several oil paintings, but it kept him busy, and he was very artistic, so this was not hard work for him. This is one of the first carvings that Palmer did, because he started small before he got into carving the big, huge tikis that he carved. And he had cedar logs shipped over from eastern Washington because they grew taller and didn't have the knots in it. This is one of the ceramic things that Palmer made. He made 3 of these, one for each of the kids, and he was doing this for physical therapy. And it was costing $12 and a trip to downtown Seattle up on Capitol Hill every day for therapy, and he decided that he could do that at home by working with clay. And he made his own molds, and after he had made the 3 to give away, then he made one out of aluminum. Johnny Dontos had a boat building company, and so they used a lot of aluminum, and they melted down all the scraps, and he brought it over and they poured an aluminum one. And I have that still on the rock wall off the patio, and it'll last forever. Palmer wasn't well, and he got a little bit bored with wood carving and ceramics and things like that, so we decided to take up oil painting. And this is one of the first paintings that he did. Stephen has 2 of his paintings that he asked for, but several people asked for those 2. But they're of horses in the mountains, which he liked. And then Brita got one, which I think is his best painting. And he wrote on the back that Brita was supposed to have that. You know, Palmer wasn't healthy, and he wanted to do all this stuff, and so we did it. And we traveled all over the world. I don't think we missed anything. He didn't feel he missed anything. Before he died, he was sick. He said, I don't think there's a thing I missed that I wanted to do in my life. I've done everything. And he said, I'm getting to the point where I'm not no good even to myself. We'd been in the hospital 17 days that time, but I didn't miss a day going to the hospital to see him. I went every single day. And he willed himself to live until the day after my birthday. And then he wanted me to promise that I'd get married. I said, no way. I'm not going to promise something that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to get married again. And I never did. And now it's 28 years he's been gone, and I'm still not married for the second time.
Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in. Let me ride through the wide open country that I love.